Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Chrissy here from CS2. Today on the podcast, we have Jason Widup, who's the VP of Marketing at Metadata. And today we're going to be talking about a super important topic, probably top of mind for most marketers, but how you can manage a tight budget. So really tips for what you should keep, how you can cut your spend, how you can be creative, and also how to ask for budget if you're really not getting any. So welcome to the podcast, Jason. It's nice to have you on.
Hey, Chrissy, thanks. Looking forward to our chat. Been listening to a couple of episodes already. And so, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, okay. So to start, we normally have people talk through their origin story. And I think you have a really good history having what I saw working in MOps and now to running marketing. So can you take us a little bit through how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and keep this short-ish because it could be a long story. But so back in 1976, so I have a business degree. I like to start there. It's like I just have this like general business degree. And I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I just kind of knew I wanted to be in business. I didn't even really know what that meant. And I actually was in the military as well. So I was in like the Marine Corps early on in my life, and then didn't finish college until I was working full time. But during that time, I got this job at AT&T Wireless, and it started in customer service. Just like a normal, hello, what's wrong with your bill? And my mom, I like to go back to my mom. My mom was like one of the first women in mainframe computing back in the 60s. So she was like, wow. She took this aptitude test with all these guys that were at this, she was like with this group of guys at this consulting practice. And she was one of the only people that passed it. And she was so she got trained on like punch cards and mainframe computing. So like, I think she just had this technical aptitude. I probably, got some of that from her.
Okay. Yeah.
And so while I was at AT&T in this customer service role, I got an IT position, I like this IT project manager position. I was like, oh, it just made sense. Everything just kind of like worked. And I just kind of, it kind of clicked. So I was like, oh, maybe I should be in IT. And so that was really where the technical side started. And then at AT&T, I saw all these consultants running around, these young consultants. And I was like, I want to be one of them. I was like, this sounds fun. They're all flying in from like all over the country, and they're staying here for weeks at a time. And they're in their young, like early 20s, just out of college. I was like, these are like, PwC folks, back in the day. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And I wanted to do that because I was like, I can bounce around a bunch of companies and see how things go, but not actually have to bounce around a bunch of companies. And so, but I didn't have my degree yet. So I finished my degree and I got on with a firm, and they said, have you ever used Omniture? And this is basically, what is it called today? Now I can't even think of what it's called today. Adobe Analytics. Sorry. Yeah. And have you ever used it before? I was like, no, I don't even know what it is. Like, well, Expedia is over there. They're replacing their homegrown one with Omniture. Why don't you go over and do it? So that was really my first foray into kind of marketing analytics. And then that just progressed. And so I got to know web analytics really well. And so then I actually went and worked for Web Trends, who was like one of the better companies back then. And, they ultimately sold to Cisco, I think. And that's where that's where it started. And so when you're in analytics, kind of deep in analytics those days, it's like how all the marketing technology kind of started with tags on sites. You know what I mean? And like, what can we get from, the data on these sites? And like, all of that is really, there's a lot of analytics involved in that, and like we needed tags, and we needed to know how to flex the tags to report on the things that we wanted to report on the websites. And so I just got really good at MarTech, at the same time. And so that's where it grew to ops, operations, and just like, oh, this makes sense. Did marketing ops at a couple of places, had a 70-person marketing operations team at Tableau. That was where things got a little maybe over my head, I think, where I was like, I'm a solutions and like fixer person. Mm-hmm. And with a team that size at a place that was that stuffy and enterprisey, I just kind of got lost. I was just like, my job was all meetings all day long, mostly one-on-ones. Politicking, which I'm really bad at. And ultimately got fired from Tableau. And that was like a wake up call. I was like, okay, maybe that was not exactly what I wanted to do. And took another ops role at Workfront. And then I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to get out of ops, and I'm ready to, and not that I like was looking to do it, but I just really, I was always in these marketing ops leadership roles. And so I was always in the leadership team meetings, right, with all the other marketing leaders. And so just through osmosis, I just learned, a lot of it was at Tableau. We had an amazing CMO there, Elisa Fink. And I just learned so much from her. And I was just like, I want to do this, and because she started Tableau, she was like marketer number 2, and she grew it to billions of dollars of revenue. And so, and she would talk about those old days. I was like, that sounds more like me, the startup. And so then I started looking for a startup to lead marketing at, instead of just the ops. And again, I say but instead of ops only, I was like, I'm ready for the whole thing. And so luckily I found Metadata, and Gil, our CEO, is very technical. He built the first version. So we got along, because he wanted, from a marketer perspective, he wanted somebody that was very ops focused, analytics focused, technical, could kind of hack my way through some of the systems, et cetera. So we got along from that perspective. But then at the same time, I was just like itching to try my brand chops. Like I used to be this person that thought, oh, marketing is a math problem, and I can math my way out of anything in marketing. And then through these last 3 years of being here, I've really changed my tune. And now, especially in MarTech, when there's so many other tools that we're competing with, brand is really how we stand out, and so I've just really loved being the first marketer hired here, really growing the brand and, into something that's, at least from a demand gen marketer's perspective, pretty well known and liked, I guess. And so that was really, I know I just took like 10 minutes, but that was kind of how I got here.
No, I think it's good because, I think one thing is kind of a few things that you touched on, I think are really important for people here. Well, one is like kind of figuring out when something isn't working for you, especially when it comes to like management. Like I think a lot of, and this happens to people a lot where they're like, oh, I'm now managing a team. I'm not doing the things that I love. Engineers have like IC roles and they can build out their teams, but you don't really see that a lot in marketing. And so I do think over time we'll maybe start to see that more because you're not setting people up for success. We're like, I don't want to manage 70 people. I just kind of want to maybe manage a smaller team or do my own thing and really flex the skills that I'm really good at. So I feel like for those of you who are feeling that way, like there maybe are other options. And then maybe a startup's right for you. Figuring out what's right for you, I think is good. And then moving into like the marketing side, I think what's really smart about you at Metadata is like really having empathy for your buyer, right? Like you're selling to demand gen, but most likely you're selling to a marketing ops person who's really going to make the final call and maybe help if there is one there to do that. So as far as like brand and really like what's going to resonate with the buyer, I think you have a great history to know that.
Yeah. And I thought, especially when you're a marketing ops leader at these large companies, you're the primary target, right, for selling.
Right.
And in smaller companies, not so much, but in the larger companies, for sure. And so being in these marketing ops leadership roles for that period of time, I was just, I've gone through so many marketing and sales cycles, right? And through going through all of them, I guess that's right. I realized what I liked and what I didn't like in those processes. And I wanted to replicate here what I liked because I realized I wasn't the guy that just went out and bought, the tools that were in the top right of the magic quadrant, like that wasn't my thing. I thought it was my job to find these niche new tools because I was like, my thought process was, well, if I just use the same everybody else is using, then I can kind of expect the same results, like that's kind of how I tell what I tell myself. Yeah. But if I can find these niche tools, it's like every company has got some uniqueness somewhere, right, in their funnel. There's something unique about, either they get stuck here or they get stuck down here, or, there's just something unique in everybody's funnel. And my approach was always like, let me find that little niche technology that can fix this one little thing, and then and be okay with cobbling together multiple technologies. So like being technology first a little bit, because then I've set up my own stack without an all-in-one, kind of solution.
Yeah.
And I can actually compete on that. I can have some differentiation in the technology I use. And so anyway, having gone through all those sales cycles, it was the ones where they cared about the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell they were there to like consult with me and make sure this was the right product for me. It was kind of like, hey, I don't want to sell this to you if I can't tell it's right for you. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of a mentality, which I love, because then that just builds that trust. And then also what I realized is these smaller companies can be nimble too. So it's like they really want to work with you, and then they'll make changes to their platform, that's like specifically for you because they can. And you're one of maybe, 100 customers or less. And so and then looking at our audience, it was like, okay. And I remember I wrote the first brand key for us, and it was the first brand key I've ever written. And I was like, okay, and I just described it in this way. It was like, when you were in college and there was that friend that was kind of nerdy, but also so smart and witty that they just cracked you up, but they were humble at the same time. It's like, that's what I want our brand to be like. I want our brand to be that nerdy person in college that like still cracked you up all the time. And so that's what we've done, tried to do anyway. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if it's worked or not, but that's always been the avatar, I guess, that we're going after.
I think it's working, especially on social.
Relatable.
Yours' social strategy is great. I know Justin Simon, I think, works on your team, and I've even had people on my team take his course before. Nice. So shout out to him. But also to you guys, like the brand is just, it really resonates. I think like that. It's a breath of fresh air, I think. But it's like having that. Like you even picking your technology, like, oh, I want to not do the same thing that everyone else is doing. And it's the same thing with like how you approach your brand, how you guys even do PR, like when you put out your like you don't even do traditional like press releases. You had your own like media junction, like being able to take those risks and go against like what everyone's doing. I think that's pretty admirable, but also you feel that it translates then into the brand. It's something that gets noticed, and you don't have to fall into these, fallacies that like you have to spend a lot or you have to play the game that everyone else is playing in order to get the same results.
Yeah. And those efforts are now that, because we're having to, we're going to talk about budget cuts here, and we're having to go through some cuts in budget now as well, just like everybody else. Well, I shouldn't say that. Most people I talk to. Yeah. And we're having to find, and we're just like, hey, we got to find creative in different ways, even from what we were, what was working before. Because our goals didn't change much, and so, and I'm sure a lot of people are kind of going through some of the same stuff right now. But when you build a brand that's really strong, and then you've got to cut some budget, you can start to actually rely on the brand more. And that's what I'm starting to realize now is because, for example, like we have community, we have different things that we do, like a demand event coming up. And we used to just fund all of it ourselves because it was like we didn't want to get mixed up and make it be, salesy or share leads. We're not like a big lead sharing, like company. And so we're like, oh, let's not do sponsorships. But now we're like, okay, budget's cut. Let's look at sponsor. Maybe we do some sponsorships. But now that the brand is strong, people are like, yes, let me, can I sponsor? And then we can dictate more of the terms so that we can still keep it non-salesy, the way we want to, but still start to self-fund some of the things, and I'm not even trying to make money off of it. I'm just like, hey, let's actually just charge enough so that we can self-fund this stuff for the community, and so like, so that was another, I guess, like benefit of focusing on the brand that I didn't really know about until recently.
Yeah. And I think I've talked about this a few times on the podcast about brand, because I think a lot of time right now people like your cost of acquisition essentially goes down because
Mm-hmm.
and also brand, but also happy customers, which is part of your brand, but like they're going to speak on your behalf and then
Yeah.
people are going to come to you direct. And so it just makes you're less reliant on these like more capture based tactics, which one have a very low conversion rate. And then two, especially if you don't have a strong brand,
Yeah.
but then two, cost a lot of money. So, I think for those who didn't like kind of invest in the brand, and there's a lot of things you can do like free, but not really,
Mm-hmm.
but can make your brand stronger. So, but speaking of budget, right now, many marketing teams, like you said, are being faced with budget cuts. It's just the reality right now. What areas do you see like most get slashed first and why? And do you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, I have the luxury of marketing to marketers. And so I get to talk to a lot of them still,
Yeah.
and the ones I've talked to, and even including myself, most of us start by cutting some type of program spend.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at ads, we're looking at sponsorships, influencer programs, those kinds of things. But what I saw was a lot of the folks I talked to, they were cutting kind of like without a lot of data behind it, and I think that's where, or they had like vanity metric data that they used, you know what I mean, to cut. So things like click-through rate, cost per click, maybe even cost per lead, which, it's a little bit better. But what I'd like to do is, obviously look at the things that have an effect on revenue, you know what I mean? And so, okay, cost per lead is high or low, whatever, but what's my cost per opportunity, or what's my cost per dollar of pipeline, for these different campaigns? And so I implore people, like, you have to have this stuff set up, before something like this happens, so that you're not rushing to like, oh, we have to get this set up, because oftentimes you can't get the historical data back, as we all know. If you're not tracking it right from the beginning. And so, so just making sure you're looking at the right things to cut, when you're looking at the programs. And this is the easy one, and I think here's what happened with me and here with us at Metadata. When you have budget, you spend budget, right? And it's not because of some weird, like, oh, use it or lose it. We're not like that. But when you have it, you're going to spend it, and it's because like you should, and especially if you're not meeting your goals. If you're not meeting your goals and you didn't spend all your budget, it's like, what's wrong with you,
Right.
And so I think like making sure you understand what in there is worth, is cutting. But then you look on the people side, and you need to have enough people to run the programs. And so that's where you want to, like, sometimes I see companies also like, they cut people first, thinking like, oh, I need to keep my program spend. And then it's all of a sudden like, oh, shoot, we don't have anybody to run the programs, because these things are not, it doesn't matter how much technology we have. Like, it still takes so much time to run, and especially like in ops roles. I like to say this because I've experienced it. And I like to say this because a lot of marketing leaders like myself don't understand it. But ops roles are hard to estimate the amount of time something's going to take, right? So like, or just ops projects, not even roles, but just, you just never know, right? Unless you start to dig in, and you're like, oh man, no, just like, oh, I was hoping that wasn't the case. Now I got to go fix this, and oh, you just follow these rabbit holes, and you have to a lot of the times.
You have to.
Yep, to uncover and to do it right.
We don't sell projects, because we would have to charge really big buffer, or we would lose a ton of money.
Smart.
Because we just you just never know walking into something what it's going to be like. So, 100% agree.
Yep. And so, so it's like it's making sure you have enough people still, to run the programs. But what's nice-ish about times like this is that oftentimes when you have the budget and you're spending it, you just get fat. You know what I mean? It's like you're spending on things that probably don't have real impact, because you just don't have time really. You're just like, hey, high growth mode, high spend mode.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes you're just like, it's working. I'm meeting my goals. I'm spending my budget. So I don't have to go and look into it. Right. So it's like you spend your time on the things that need the time. And if you're meeting your goals and you're spending your money, you're like, that doesn't need my time right now. But often what that means is there's a lot of stuff in there that's probably not really optimized. And so with us right now, that's kind of what we're going through is, when everything was fat and happy, I was like, yeah, this is nice, don't have to look too much in there. We can spend our time on like creative, new, fun things, you know what I mean? And just like trying new things and more experimentation. And then when it got a little tighter, I was like, okay, let's spend some time. Let's go through it, with a fine tooth comb. Let's make sure we really understand how these dollars are working. What can we cut and still not, because a lot of times our budgets are cut more severely than our goals are. Right. And so so that's usually, I don't know. Did anybody have like a 1-for-1? Let me know. That'd be nice.
No, I can say from what I've seen, no.
Yeah.
And maybe they do have some goals that are cut, but they're never the right goals. Like your pipeline goals.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
It's just like maybe what, so I agree. I think everyone's kind of feeling that. And then it's the marketer's dilemma. Like, oh, I'm expected to do, the same thing, but with less budget. But I think I agree with you, though. Like, I think a lot of folks will then neglect like certain things around like the analysis part and really seeing what works and what doesn't, because you're just like, I'm just trying. I'm in building mode. Like, I'm not going to take the time to really go back. But I think this is also like a resurgence to then get like marketers and marketing teams just in that mode again. Like a lot of our projects right now, or a lot of initiatives that we're doing with our clients is more like, reviewing their tech stack or looking at even the reporting that they have, like that you're talking about, like trying to see what's really driving opportunities in pipeline, and that's closing, right? Like not just pipeline that's just sitting there. So I think but getting to those habits and creating frameworks that the whole team can use is just a good habit to get into that I think a lot of teams just got out of. And I think back like to kind of the last slowdowns or recession around like 2010, 11, post 2008, teams were being, I think we had less tools back then and we're still being more, going through things with a fine tooth comb. So I think you were just like coming back to that and seeing how can we do the same, but with less too. Because I think also people went on spending sprees.
Yes. Oh, 100%. In their personal lives too. Yeah. Personal and business lives. And like one of the things I like about working at Metadata is our founder is pretty frugal. You know what I mean? Sometimes that's not great, but like, and he's not to the point where he's like, he doesn't like to spend money on fun stuff, so we get to, he likes to do that, but he really wants accountability to the dollars, you know what I mean? Which I like that. And I remember my first meeting at our office in San Francisco when we had an office in San Francisco. I'm coming from like, Tableau and Workfront, I'm just like these nice offices. I walk in for my first meeting with Gil to our like startup cave in San Francisco. And I tell you, I was like, where am I? Am I in a third world country now? I was just like, there was windows open, air conditioning wasn't working. It was the middle of the summer. There was chairs in disarray. They didn't work. I didn't know if I wanted to sit down. There were developers on the ground, just like, there was weed paraphernalia. There was like alcohol everywhere. I was like, all right, but what it told me in my mind, I was like, I love this. Cause on the outside, you know what I mean? We looked like a serious, like going forward company. And here we are, just like in a basement, in this like, in like the Tenderloin, literally in San Francisco, didn't even want to go outside. It's like, can I just sleep in the office? And so I love that, and that I could see that mentality early on, and he carried that through. So like, for example, and he just did a presentation on this, after our Series A, he was like tighter. You know what I mean? We actually got tighter after we got our cash from the Series A, which like most companies, yes, let's go, let's fix the stuff like that we're living in, Swaller or whatever that, let's fix that. But no, we were like, actually, let's get a little tighter. And that was nice because our valuation actually increased in like 6 months. and we got a bridge, like loan between then and our like Series B at better terms. And we've just always been like that. So like when we do have to cut, it's not super, it's usually not dramatic because we've already been pretty lean, we keep lean. And so I like that, I like leaders and founders that don't want to take a huge multiple and have to work, 3-4 years to like get into that, into that valuation. And we did the same thing with our Series A and B. We took a reasonable valuation, and so, so I like that. And I think more marketers, you should at least have the capability to tighten up, you know what I mean? Like, so that when you have to, it's an easy decision. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh no, what do we do now? So it's like, at least be ready, you know what I mean? To like have to dig in and look at what you need to cut. So be ready with the data and just make sure your stuff is set up in a way where you can get to those answers, relatively easily.
Yeah, definitely. I think having that culture too, like you said, from like your CEO down, like, and just part of like the company kind of DNA, I think is good. And one thing that I think people don't realize, like, well, okay, what's the benefit of that? And he probably doesn't. It's hard with the startup. You can't really have like a profit first mentality, but really thinking about, okay, how can we make the most of our money and not have to make these huge cuts? But it protects your people first too, because I think that's where we saw a lot of companies like, okay, what happened? Oh, they had to cut their teams and their people, and that's much harder to do than like, hey, let's just maybe change a little bit of our spend here and whatever. Yeah. But when people got over their skis, like that's where they're going to look first. That's a huge expense for them. And then you then lose momentum. And like you said, who's going to run the programs anymore? Okay, now we have to like scale back. So it's a much better place to be, to have that kind of like way of looking at your company and how you're going to grow. And it's not bad. It's people, I think, will get caught up in these numbers and big valuations, but also like, let's also focus on like the health of the company and like, so I think that's super important. I think that's really interesting. We'll have to try and find the presentation they were talking about and put it into the notes. But one thing I also wanted to kind of cover is, where do you think teams should not cut budget? Because I think and I think you kind of mentioned this, is like people won't use data to like back their decisions. But do you think there's any areas that people should maybe really think twice before cutting, because it could, impact their marketing, negatively?
Yeah. It's really paid ads. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where times like this, and there's like a lot of studies, that companies that continue to market and advertise during a recession come out stronger oftentimes, or as leaders, or a different position afterwards. And there's a couple of reasons, ads are cheaper right now, is one thing. So there's, there's more inventory. And so so like, for example, right now, our demand event is coming up end of October, and we have this big 10,000 registration goal to hit. And we're spending a couple $100,000 in advertising. And what's been nice about right now is our CPLs are lower than our projections, because we were going off of last year's, you know what I mean? Historical data. And it's literally probably 25% less, than we were seeing last year. And I talk about that kind of ad because that's an easy ad for somebody to click through. It's not a demo. It's just like, it's a free event, and so kind of apples to apples from last year. But it's like, keep advertising, but keep the stuff that's working, like that's like, yes, sure. Cut some ads. Yes. Definitely. Cause you're probably wasting money right now. But keep it as high as you can, because, especially if that's your primary lead source, like demo source, for sure. Then you don't want to cut back too far. But in what I saw is, like, when we first started some of the recession stuff, all of my efficiencies remain the same in marketing, all the way to pipeline. And then what we saw is the stuff wouldn't close. You know what I mean? And so like, you also want to make sure, because what I did is we did some cuts, and I kept spending for 3 months at the same level. Cause I'm like, hey, all now I'm paying the piper for that. But, at the time I was like, hey, maybe this recession is false. Maybe we'll come out of this. And then if I keep spending, then I'll keep up, we'll keep pace. Well, all my numbers stayed the same, but then sales wasn't able to close, like probably 5 million of my pipeline. And that was like, okay. So then that was a sign for me too. It was like, okay, I can't just be, full all the way to pipeline. I was fine. You know what I mean? Like all the way to like cost per dollar of pipeline. But then the delays, and like people not making decisions, about their budgets and those kinds of things then started hitting it. And so it's like, I think it was the right decision because that's still all demand, that came in and we were able to give demos to. But now I'm having to cut even a little bit more to kind of make up for that because the recession didn't stop in 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, I am not an economist. And so that's very clear. Like 3 months. Yeah, no problem. We're good.
Well, there's so much uncertainty too of like where things were going. And it's even uncertain now. Like we see glimpses of, things getting better. And but we think about, we are kind of like almost like 9 months deep into it now, like pretty much. But right. I think one thing to your point, like you can maybe adjust a little bit more now, but at least you have that pipeline that's been built up. And those are all people that you can return back to, you can run campaigns against to reactivate them. Sales has those relationships. And so that's better than I think what a lot of marketers do is they just halt everything. And then they have no momentum on anything. And then they, what if things did change 6 months later? Oh shit, we don't have any pipeline, know, and then it takes a long time to then generate it. So I think having that buffer, thinking about the future, yes, it's going to be slower to close, but at least you can kind of, go back to that, those deals or those people. And instead of just like this really quick, oh shit moment, which is harder to trail back from. So I think I agree with you, especially on the paid ads part, is like just kind of invest into things that are working, but also it's a good time to just also like experiment when things are really cheap. If you have always struggled to be competitive against some of your like competitive keywords and stuff like that, they're cheaper now. So it's a good time to maybe get there and be seen. And also, do some of those tests. But I think, like you said, like that's within reason, I think, but know that like continuing things there and not stopping, I think is super important because momentum is just key. Like it's so hard to go back from, has anyone been on a run and then you accidentally have to stop because, you're, I don't know, something happened, you have to tie your shoe or your kid's complaining or something. And then, and then it's so hard. You're like, wait, this is so much harder to start back up again. That's kind of exactly the same thing with marketing. You want to like keep things in motion because it'll just be so much easier than having to start back up again.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And, another thing we're not cutting is content, So like, I think that's another important one. Content is, this is maybe not the time to start to invest in content. You know what I mean? Like if you're cutting budgets and like, cause that's a long game, but if you were investing in content, and that is a material part of, the experience, then that's the other area where we're not, we're definitely not cutting. I mean, I trimmed a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure we trimmed mostly by going out to some of our partners and just asking for discounts, you know what I mean? And, mostly freelance, like freelance or, SEO companies that we work with, and just asked for like, hey, we don't want to churn, but we want to still work with you. Can you work with us for a little while? And again, because we're friendly people, we're nice to work with, I think is part of it. They're willing to help out, a lot of them, if they could, they did. Content, I think, especially if you do good content, like quality content that your audience really does engage with, you can't really let that go. And then events, if you're doing your own event, now event sponsorships, I'd say like, that's really up to you. I don't do them, just cause I've never really had success. I will, if like the right opportunity is presented to me, with like the right cool thing to do. But if you're doing your own event, that's, I think, people still want to get together. People still want to network. They still want to have that experience. Events, your own events are really, really good ways of building relationship with either clients or prospects, showing them how you work, And so I think events, your own event, and even if they're just like little networking dinners and stuff, like those kinds of things, I think still, if you can support those, I think those are still good to do. Obviously they don't touch as many people, but the people they touch, like it's in a deep way, and we just did 2 customer events, one in San Fran and one in New York in August. And we hadn't done one yet, really, because, pandemic. And that's really where we started to grow, was right in the beginning of the pandemic. And so it was awesome. It was great to get the customers together, have them network, get to meet them. They got to spend some time with our CEO and other leaders in the company. It was just like really good. And then we had a really awesome experience, we did some fun things and different things. And so I think those experiences will resonate with people. They just stay with people.
Yeah.
And I think those things can pay dividends from a relationship standpoint, from a commercial standpoint. So yeah, I think events, a loose term, but just like getting together, with your customers and prospects and spending time with them, I think is something not to cut.
Yeah. I think it's like when it comes to like that high touch or like the customer experience, prospect experience, like you said, it pays dividends, especially in the, when your customers are happy. Well, one, maintaining them, but then 2, which marketers, we're always, especially at startup, are focused on new business, but like you still want to maintain your current book of business. That's how companies scale. But like I said, they can be great word of mouth. I mean, the way that people buy technologies these days, right? And marketing tools, marketing ops tools, especially. You're not like really going to a trade show and going through those booths, but you're really like going to communities and asking people and, talking to your peers. Like it's a really tight group of people. I know I've had mainly a lot of them on this podcast and they all engage with each other. And so when I think, delight your customers, like you said, that's a differentiator as well. Like, yes, you could be that smaller company, smaller tool, but like when you're keeping them happy, you make them feel seen. Like how many times are you a customer of technology and you get an email that barely even talks to you like you're a customer and you're like, wow, like you can't even get to customer support, that plays a big impact on churn, but also your willingness to invest your own time in the tool, but also talk about the company, like, oh wow, metadata, like, yeah, they're awesome. I just met with them, seeing all the cool things that their clients are doing too. Creating that community to share ideas, like that all like has benefits that will last beyond this, hopefully not very long slowdown. So totally agree.
And a lot of those things you were talking about are hard to measure, or almost impossible to measure the impact on the bottom line or, on revenue. And so, and I always give credit to our CEO, Gil, because he was a marketer, which is hard. Sometimes it's hard to work for, a CEO that was a marketer, and now, but he's never, of course, I came in and I drove demand from day one, and I drove demand, really well, and I proved myself from the beginning. But, since then, I don't have to have data, like I don't have to have like discrete, like linear data that shows like, oh, this community just drove $200,000 of ARR. I don't have to have that. There's this general understanding that these kinds of things are the right things to do.
Right.
And if we do them well, they will ultimately lead to revenue, And so I get to build a community and start small with it, in a beta way, and like grow the community in a organic way, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Without like some big goals, like get a bunch of people in the community and let's do it the right way, and same thing with our demand conference. It's like, the kinds of speakers we would want to listen to and we would want to go and sit down and spend a day with, and not charging people for it, and that kind of thing. That's where I think some marketers have that innate ability, but they're limited by their leadership, and so I just want to acknowledge that. It's like there's a lot of marketers out there that they want to do this kind of stuff, they want to have a community, but their leadership is like, cool, so then can you drive $2 million of revenue from the community in the first week, and they're just like put these weird, crazy expectations on it, and then you don't do it right, or you don't do it at all. And so I just, I always like to acknowledge that, because it's easy to talk about what's the right thing to do, but just also acknowledging there's a lot of leadership out there that we just won't let you do the right things. It's just like
totally
lame.
I love that you touched on that. It makes me think of, I know a metadata friend and advisor, but like Dave Gerhardt always says, don't want to work for a CEO who doesn't understand marketing. And but I think also thinking about the downstream effects, it's not just like a CEO, but sometimes even like you said, just like marketing leadership, like I think sometimes they maybe are so removed, and this is a benefit maybe to you with having an analytics background, that the models are made up. You are doing your best to come up with this, and that there's things getting missed. And so it comes down to, not throwing away the data, but using it the best you can. But also know there's limitations, and you got to use common sense, and you got to like know what's just good marketing. And I think a lot of the time, like marketers get stifled by like, we have to do things that are on a dashboard, or every opportunity needs to have a source tied to it, and it puts a lot of even stress on marketing ops folks, right? Because they're trying to say, okay, I'm trying to make this data perfect, but it's never perfect, right? But the expectation is that it will be. So I'm glad you said that, because I think that's a lot of what we try to do on the education front. A lot of these things is like educating, okay, but if you have the leadership who understands that too, you won't be you get to do the things that make sense. I always use this example of, I worked in demand gen before starting CS2 and MOPS and at a startup, and I was like, we should do a podcast. Like I think that, and this was 9 years ago, but I was like,
before it was like what everyone did, nice.
And I was like, I feel like they're gonna be popular. Executives are busy, they don't have time, but they have commutes, or they have like maybe some free time, but they're not going to be at the computer. Like we were selling to security people, and I'm like, well, maybe let's try out like a conversational podcast. And the CEO was like, no one does podcasts,
Exactly. You're like, exactly. You're like, yes, thank you for noticing that
by now.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it was also, it's like, where's the pipeline going to come from that? And I think so that was always like the thinking behind it. So I think marketers are changing, leadership's changing, especially as marketers maybe even go into leaders, but you do have that benefit, which is good. Okay, I want to end with one final question that I can sneak through. So I think marketers sometimes are still trying to get some request pushed through, or they need some budgets to like say, especially marketing ops, like they want to hold on to their tool, or they want to keep a vendor. What's the best way that they can effectively like ask to maintain that, or keep it, or get, push it through?
Yeah. Great question. So the first thing to understand is like, when we're trying to cut budget, we're trying to cut annualized spend. So like, that's really the thing to keep in mind is like, we're looking for things that are just, you're spending every month on something. Tools fall into that. You pay for it once, but usually, budgets are amortized over the year. Headcount, obviously that's ongoing. So you're really the CFO and finance are looking to cut things that just are ongoing. And so one simple thing, and this is what I do when I cut my budget, I cut it hard. You know what I mean? To the point where like, I almost can't do anything now except run ads, and like do a couple things, because then what I do is I go back with little business cases for little smaller things that I want to do. And they're not annualized. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, okay, I want to do this event. Oh, we have this opportunity to do this event. Oh, shoot, I don't have the budget for it. Darn. This is going to be, this can be the result of that, and as long as there's some kind of commercial result, ideally, then I'll get a thumbs up, because there's more money there. We're just trying to protect runway, right? And runway, you need to remove the things that are like annualized expenses. So that's one way to think about it. And trust me, your finance, your leadership teams are thinking about it in that same way. And so like push on that a little bit. See if you can get like a little bit of project money here and there, like $40,000 here, $20,000 there, and do like fun, interesting things with it that, prove out that you can, the result is what close to at least what you said it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
The harder ones are the annualized spend. And so that's where, now, if you're just given a hard number, like, hey, all right, you just got to cut 15%, then that's one thing. But if you have the decision, of like, or if you have the ability to keep some stuff in there, or make a case for it, then it comes back to the data. Leadership is looking to cut tools that they can't make a direct line to some kind of a revenue or lift from it. And they're really looking for, all right, how much am I spending on that tool? And then how much is that tool giving me in profit, basically? Mm-hmm. And so if you can somehow show, and I would actually, when I bought tools, even, at big companies, I would say the same thing. It's like, if I'm going to spend $10,000, I need to show 10,001 cents of revenue from this thing, because then it's at least a positive ROI on that technology spend. And so the better and more clear you can tell that story. So you got to be pretty good with data. You want to be good with data. Mm-hmm. You can tell that story and make a business case. Then it's almost like you want to put it in a way where if they say no, it's almost like they're making a stupid choice. It's like, you said no to this ROI. I'm going to spend $10,000. I'm going to make $30,000, and there's no other way for me to make that $30,000. And you said no. All right, you just like, okay. I don't know what we're doing here now. And so you just put it in a way where, and I've gotten really good at making business cases on this kind of stuff, because like you said earlier, a lot of our models are just kind of like, finger in the air. I think this is right. But if you know your audience and you can get that model to like, and of course, you don't want to lie about it. You want to know you have a chance of hitting it. Of course, you don't want to just lie and get the money and then, oh shoot, sorry, not the results.
Because you're going to be measured on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, 100%. They will be looking at you. Yeah. When they make that investment, it's an investment. They're thinking of it like an investment, really. And so, but yeah, just be able to tell a clear story with data and defend it with the data. And then it's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, let's keep doing that. And maybe let's go look over there for, cuts.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is where, if you work in demand gen or you're head of marketing, you definitely want to partner with your, MOps teams or, your data analysts. Like, if you're not if you're unable to like even understand what's happening there, like that's a good time to start that relationship. And then for those who do manage that data, and we're going to actually do a podcast in 2 weeks talking all about ROI and a discussion on ROI. But this is your time to really even create that, like prove, you have the keys to the kingdom there. You probably know how to get that data. You can probably prove that, and then use it to your own advantage to make these business cases even yourself. I think even for resources, because I think marketing ops were already under-resourced. And like you said, people and programs are still running, goals don't change. But then if the resources or people to get things done is impacted, like you're definitely gonna make the case for it. But, like you said, there's a lot of stuff though that is maybe annualized that you could cut and like start there too. But you have the data to give you those insights as well. So I like that. Well, this was an awesome conversation. I think super informative for marketing leaders, demand gen folks, all in marketing ops. So thank you so much, Jason, for being on and sharing your own stories and how your, all your success, but also all of your, trials and triumphs at Metadata through this time. I'm excited that you guys are still doing your demand event. I think it's one of the, best events for B2B marketers, really. So we'll also be including a link to about that in the show notes. And for those of you who want to connect with Jason, you can find him on LinkedIn and anywhere else that they can learn more about you or Metadata.
No, pretty much. Yeah, just metadata.io. Find me on LinkedIn. I try to have fun on LinkedIn too.
Yeah. And if you're not following Metadata on LinkedIn, you should, because actually they're one of the best company pages, I think, out there, sharing some really cool and funny stuff. So for those of you who enjoyed this episode of Forward Thinking, feel free to share it with your colleagues and friends, or give us a review or like. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Chrissy.